That worked. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brad Smith. I'm part of the Amos Fortune Forum Committee that organizes each of these presentations during the summer, and I want to welcome all of you to the third session of the 76th year that the Amos Fortune Forum has been presenting here in the Meeting House. And I want to thank all of you for braving the weather and coming out tonight. We had a few cracks of thunder and lightning tonight, but you're a brave group of souls, so thank you very much for coming and showing up. We often ask our audience, who would you like to have come speak and what would you like them to speak on? And consistently at the top of the list is local people talking about local things. So having Chris here tonight, I think, is a special treat and should be right up in our, what we want to hear. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Chris has to say. He'll get a much better introduction in just a minute, but I wanted to say that is, the number one thing that we hear all the time. I do have a few things I wanted to mention. I'll be very brief. First, a couple of thank yous. I want to thank Robin Oliver for donating this beautiful bouquet of flowers this evening. I want to thank Susan Sarles, who has organized the reception that will immediately follow tonight's presentation. You all are welcome to come for some light refreshments and to meet with our speaker and our moderator, ask questions that may not have been asked during the regular session this evening, and just have a chance to relax and socialize. So it'll be dark when we're done. Be careful walking over. You'll see the lanterns that point you in the direction of the church. Just follow them, and you'll see the lights on over there. And please, we invite you all to come. I also want to thank all of our business and corporate sponsors, as well as the many individuals who contribute to the forum. Since 1946, this has been free and open to all, and it's our commitment to keep it that way. So thank you very much. Thank you. And if you're so moved and you haven't contributed yet, we do have our begging bowls at each of the doors. I'd be remiss in not mentioning that, and we welcome any of your spontaneous donations. Also, we are now live streaming these presentations, so if you have family and friends who live far away and can't make it, please let them know that they can tune in to YouTube Live. You just go to our website, and there'll be a little box you can click on, and it'll take you right there. We certainly want you to come here into the Meeting House and see it live, but if you can't make it or your friends and family can't, please let them know about that. It's also recorded, so you can see it tomorrow, the next day, and the day after that. Also, when the weather is good, we're starting to set up chairs outside earlier in the evening. If you want to come and bring a picnic dinner, you're welcome to do that. On hot evenings, you may actually want to sit outside. We'll project the sound out the back of the Meeting House, and that might be a nice way to spend the evening as well. We didn't put the chairs out tonight. So with that, let me hand over the mic to Paul Tuller, who will make a more proper introduction. So Paul?
Have you ever had anyone ask you, what is your superpower? I always considered that was a silly question, but then I thought, I have a superpower. My superpower is that when I meet someone who is exceptionally good at their profession, I notice right away, and I want to get to know them as much as I can. Meeting Chris Myott for the first time over 10 years ago set off that power. I noticed right away that he was incredibly talented, and I wanted to learn more about him. Most of you know by now that he was born here in Jaffrey, attended school here until he went off to college, studied art. He worked in the Boston area for a number of years, painting and doing furniture from found objects. But in 2009, he moved back to town and started focusing on painting. Since then, Chris has been checking off the boxes on the list of what it takes to become a successful artist. He has learned his craft through many years of practice. He paints every day. He looks deeply at his subjects. He paints what captures his interests, and he's always exploring new ideas. He paints big paintings and small paintings. He is versatile and paints landscapes, still lifes, portraits, and does abstract pieces. He's developed a distinctive style of work, whether he's painting mousetraps, motorcycles, or mountains. You know that picture was created by Chris Myott. And as an added bonus, he's a genuinely kind and humble person. Whether you keep a diary or not, tonight I want you to go home and write down in a spot where you will see it over the next few years that today I got to meet Chris Myott. I need to pay attention to him in the future because he's got something special going. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to all of you Chris Myott.
I'm going to try not to get emotional here tonight. This is so beautiful. Thank you all for turning out. This is such a beautiful space. I've actually never been in here, so it's amazing to see so many of you. I'm pretty nervous, so hang in there with me, and we'll try to get through this. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to speak to my community about my life's work and my relationship to my hometown. Being able to make art every day of my life uncompromised is a dream come true, and it has been my aspiration for as long as I can remember. This comes at a really interesting time to me because recently I turned 40, so a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about tonight has sort of been rattling through my brain anyways. I'm pretty sure that that's called the midlife crisis, but we'll move past that. I called this The Art and the Stories because I love the simplicity of that title. Here's some art, and here's some stories about how I think it got made. I thought the best way to do this would be to break it up into 7 milestones that contributed to my development as an artist. My first memory of art, which is the first time I remember being moved by art. The community push, which is the community's involvement, recognizing something in me and working to capitalize on that. Next is Becky, meeting my future wife in the 10th grade, which is the greatest impact I've had on my career so far. Leaving Jaffrey, going to college, being immersed in art and creativity, eventually moving to Boston and developing my process while I was there. Returning home, which is when I had my breakthrough moment, and apprenticing as a furniture maker, and eventually moving back to my hometown and buying a house. Iron and Air, which was meeting an artistic peer and collaborator, social media, and a little bit of good luck. And finally, Leaning In, which was a realization and understanding my voice as an artist. First, though, a little bit about my background. Home was this small 2-bedroom house on probably 1/10 of an acre on Bourgeois Street behind Beltate's right here in Jaffrey. I grew up in a house with 5 sisters and 1 brother. Not everybody's pictured here, but we all shared the same dark sense of humor and artistic inclination. My mother is a local legend. Everybody knows my mom. My mom is an optimist to her own detriment. I feel like I get that quality probably from my mom. She is enthusiasm and love personified, a genuine free spirit. I continue to learn from her every day about what it means to be free. She is absolutely unrattled. My father is a craftsman, a hunter, a farmer, and an artist. His favorite words of wisdom to me have always been to cut your own path. My parents have always been incredibly supportive of me and proud of me, and they would scrimp and save to make sure that I had everything I needed to blossom as a creative individual. Guitars, art supplies, skateboards, absolutely anything I needed. Every inch of that tiny piece of property was utilized. Our backyard was filled with all sorts of different types of birds, turkeys, pheasants, peacocks, and some of the meanest chickens that you've ever seen. We also had gardens, huge gardens, plants that grew taller than the house. In fact, some of those plants actually ended up sending my dad to jail. And that is actually where I get to the beginning of my presentation, which is my first memory of art. My first memory of making art was sending drawings back and forth to my dad while he was in prison. I was probably 5 or 6 years old when I got my first drawing from my dad of cars. I would try to copy these drawings of cars and send them back to him. My mom would make a big production of these drawings, and she would explain to me how much my father needed those drawings from me. Art sort of became the foundation of our relationship, and I think that inadvertently my parents instilled in me at a young age the power that art has to communicate. This was also around the same time that I started school, and that's where I get to the community push. After my father was taken away, I was terrified that my mother would also disappear if I lost sight of her, and that actually made school very difficult for me, starting out in school. I had a hard time focusing, and I was drawing on anything I could get my hands on, textbooks, clothing, my arms, which is clearly continued into adulthood. Fortunately, though, my teachers recognized something in me early on, and they made every effort to blend art and schoolwork in order to keep me moving forward. I was involved in all sorts of after-school programs and community activities. I have so many fond memories of people from our community stepping forward to help my family and me and to make sure that we weren't left behind. Clearly, I also had a little bit of my dad's rebellious streak in me, you can see there. As well as a pretty healthy dose of teenage angst. Those are some early middle school, high school drawings. But I honestly think that that is often how artists are created. They're forged in fire. And Jaffrey gave me a safe place to be able to explore that anxiety or that angst as a teenager. By the time I got into middle school, I was recognized as a class artist. I remember Miss Albozic, my middle school teacher, giving us all a project on the first day of school, and I remember her taking mine and using it as an example to show the rest of the classes. And at that moment, I felt like art was my superpower. By the time I got into high school, my learning track was heavily art-based, and I was thriving socially. I became the student council president by drawing my own campaign posters of like Wayne's World and different celebrities, all with sort of speech bubbles singing my praises, of course. I'm so grateful to my community for giving me opportunities in my youth to be able to express myself through my art. My angst didn't take the form of anger. Instead, it was motivation to succeed and to do better. Next, we get to Becky. It was in high school that I met Becky when I was 16 years old, and she is one of the most important and impactful events of my career as an artist and as a human. Me and Becky have been inseparable since the day we met. We've literally experienced everything together. This is actually our first picture together. Becky's always known that I was built to be an artist, and she's never expected anything different from me. She's also served as my muse for the last 25 years. Every single plant that shows up in any of my paintings are plants that Becky's brought into our home. This is Becky's favorite spot to go in the winters, house by the side of the road in Wilton. When Becky started using old tin cans as planters, those showed up in my paintings as well. The other fortunate thing about meeting Becky so young was the addition of a second supportive family. Her mother would take me to Boston to see exhibitions at the MFA. The first car I ever owned was a Buick that her father let me make payments on, and then eventually gave me all that money back so that I could pay for a trip to go to France with Becky my senior year. The French trip was originally reserved for the French class, but my teachers pushed to let me go because they knew that I would benefit from all the art, which is just another example of the community stepping in and doing what they could do to make sure I thrived. When I was 25 years old, I became very ill, and I ended up in the hospital for a couple weeks. And Becky literally became a nurse afterwards so that we would never be confused about the complicated inner workings of the hospital again. Becky, sorry. I was afraid this was gonna happen. Becky is my best friend and my biggest collaborator. I'm incredibly lucky to have met her in my youth. Becky is the ship that keeps us afloat, and I'm just the person who paints it and makes it look pretty. I would absolutely not be where I am today without Becky. She actually even filled out all of my college applications for me. Which brings me to my next milestone, which is leaving Jaffrey. Once I was in college, it was art 24 hours a day. I was totally immersed in art. And it was during this time that I started to develop my painting style and started to really get inspired by other artists. I loved the work of Pablo Picasso, and I would often make trips to the Currier Museum to look at the Picasso paintings that they had on loan. One of the things that drew me to those Picasso paintings was all of the grime that had built up on those paintings over the years. And that is the same look that I wanted for my own paintings. So I started experimenting with finishes and started a journey trying to get that look just right. I was also inspired by the work of Egon Schiele. His use of line and the way he organizes compositions is still an inspiration to this day. I especially love the way he drew hands and joints. His work would heavily influence my motorcycle series later on. This is where I started drawing through the paint while wet to maintain the same energy that was in my sketches. I wanted to make sure that the work had an unedited quality or showed the artist's hands like a signature. I wasn't interested in polishing away what makes it uniquely mine. Alice Neel was another huge influence on my work. The way her light color palette would show off her line work is something that I've held on to and continue to utilize. On the left is a painting of my sisters, and on the right is an early painting of Becky, and you can see Alice Neel's influence on those paintings. By the time I graduated college and moved to Boston, I was heavily inspired by the paintings and the philosophy of Agnes Martin. I love the way she chose to approach her paintings. She looked past the artist statement and viewed the work simply on how it made her feel. These paintings were actually from a series called Seeds and Weeds, which was the first postgraduate show I had on Newbury Street. This is also where I started painting plants early on. It was during this time that I was trying to piece together a living as a woodworker using skills that I learned from my father and making and selling single-speed bicycles that I would find here at the dump in Jaffrey and bring back to Boston to rebuild and sell to hipsters and bike messengers in the city. Eventually, the back and forth from Boston to Jaffrey for supplies and inspiration kindled a desire to return home, and that's where I get to my next milestone. The physical space of this area was more conducive to me for creating work. The open fields, the big barns filled with old tools were just irresistible to me. Our first apartment back home was in Dublin, living in the barn of a local woodworker who used salvage materials and had a process for aging wood. On the right is the first piece of antique furniture that I use these techniques on, and that wood grain is actually all hand-painted wood grain. Packy also showed me how to build and sell a product. He showed me that it was possible to make a living as an artist. He continues to be a close friend and a source of inspiration to me. My time was spent 50-50 making paintings and making furniture, basically anything to not have a boss. I was still driving back and forth to Boston several times a week to deliver furniture that I was building here in Dublin. The picture on the left is actually from a salon on Newbury Street. I designed all the furniture and all the mirrors, and the picture on the right is a home here in Harrisville. I began to apply aging techniques that I learned from Packy on my actual paintings. And then I started framing my paintings in the frames I was building instead of turning them into high-end mirrors. I actually started that because buying the glass for those mirrors was so expensive and I didn't have the money. So I just put my paintings in there instead. But this was actually a breakthrough moment for me. The first 3 paintings that I used this technique on, I put in a show at the Sharon Arts Center, and all 3 paintings sold immediately to a couple that was visiting from France. The gallery then asked me for 3 more paintings to replace those paintings, and those replacement paintings sold almost immediately as well. At that point, I realized that I was onto something with this technique. Those are actually some close-ups of the paintings. I started selling my paintings at the same place that I was selling my furniture, the Bowerbird, the New Hampshire Antiques Co-op, the Broke Arts Fair. Shout out to Eric and Mary Gagney for putting those events on. All of this gave me a local audience, and it began to make my work more accessible. I began a journey focusing on honing this technique. These are the first couple of paintings that I made after the Sharon Arts Center show. This is actually a perfect spot to stop for a second and to talk about process. This is a painting I made of Paul Tuller, who actually just introduced me. I start with a sketch. I try to basically loosely get everything in position that I want. The next thing that I work on is simplifying and paring down excess lines while trying to maintain that same energy that's in my original sketch. I try to commit the drawing to memory as much as possible. After I transfer my sketch onto a surface, which is masonite or hardboard, I begin applying the paint with a palette knife and drawing through the paint while it's still wet. This technique is what gives the painting a carved look. I begin filling in all the elements of the composition, paying close attention to scale and color. And this painting specifically, I wanted to push the subject back in the composition. I wanted to make a portrait of Paul that not only captured his dedication to his craft, but also somehow showed his modesty and gentleness. So I arranged the composition to show off all of his work and his tools. I didn't want the portrait to be overbearing or looming. I included elements that have special meaning to Paul: hand planes, samitsubu, which is like a Japanese chalk line, as well as the first toolbox that he ever made. I try to pay close attention to those small details that I feel like sometimes get lost. I begin to add additional layers on top of the dry layers, and I repeat the process of drawing through the wet paint, but this time I used a sharpened eraser in order to reveal the color underneath. Every layer has to be smoothed out with a palette knife in order for the final wax layer to have the right effect. If I were to leave the brush strokes, the wax would simply fall into each one of those strokes, and the finished product would look completely muddy. Once I'm satisfied with the painting, I apply a wax finish, and at this point, there's no going back. The painting can't be worked any further. I've learned to appreciate that part of the process, though, because it's my natural tendency to feel like I could probably make the painting a little bit better, so it keeps me from reworking the painting indefinitely. Okay, back on track to the original part of the slideshow. Next is Iron and Air. Iron and Air was a New Hampshire-based motorcycle magazine. Greg Moore was the creative director and co-founder and one of my closest friends and artistic collaborators. We actually met at a house party where he showed me a Café Racer that he was building. This was the beginning of my obsession with motorcycles. I use those motorcycles a lot as a stand-in in my figures and as a stand-in for figures in much of my work. Painting those machines helped give me a better understanding and appreciation of them, and I try to let that show through in the work. I want to show that I'm intimately involved in the subjects that I paint, so I often include tools that correspond with the motorcycle that I'm working on. If you look closely, a lot of times those wrenches are the exact size that they need to be to fix the certain element that I have in the painting. Shortly after buying our home in Jaffrey, I was in issue 11 of Iron and Air, as well as having my art on the cover. And this, along with the rise of social media, gave me a global platform to sell my work from and started an ongoing series of motorcycle-related paintings. Eventually, I started incorporating the plants into the motorcycle paintings. And then I started incorporating interior elements, bringing interior spaces and even bringing the bikes into into my house. And including more of Becky's plants and planters, as well as other objects. This is a painting of a Ducati by Walt Siegel, who is a world-renowned motorcycle builder that lives right here in Harrisville. I also took inspiration from Japanese pottery and started incorporating motorcycles onto vases. And the vases actually gave me an easy way to scale down the motorcycles and easily fit them in a composition, and it gave me a way to continue to add plants and other elements into the paintings of motorcycles. Greg and I also worked together on a project that we called Work Life, which is a 2-day celebration of art and music that we host in my barn for free, featuring artists and musicians from around the country. The purpose of this show was to be able to share art with my community that they may otherwise not get a chance to see. Becky actually makes food for everyone who attends as well, which ends up being easily over 100 people squeezed into our small barn. Michael Ullman is an artist we featured who makes sculptures made from found objects, including tin cans and old sewing machines. Michael actually had his work in the newest Mad Max movie as well, so it was really cool to have his work in our barn. This is Sean Rao. Sean Rao is a musician we featured twice at our Work Life shows. If you don't know who Sean Rao is, then I strongly suggest that you look him up immediately on your drive home and listen to his music. Greg and I also just finished a project filming, we also just finished filming a project for BMW for their 100-year anniversary. The project features 3 artists from around the country that use BMWs in their work. Greg continues to be one of my most valuable resources and closest friends. Anytime that I have a new idea for a series of paintings or a song or a vehicle project or anything that I can think of, I contact Greg first to get his thoughts. There's Greg right there. Next is leaning in. I've recently come to the realization that the best way that I can communicate through my art is to lean into exactly what interests me. That's what seems to resonate the strongest with people. People can pick up on something that's genuine. It took me a long time to understand that my most genuine voice actually is my hometown, and by extension, my community. This is a painting of my living room that I made during the pandemic. If you look closely, you can see a painting inside a painting. Every object in this painting has special meaning to me. That's actually the painting, that's one of my paintings in one of my paintings. I was kind of proud of that. This is my wood shop. That little skill saw on the right was given to me by Becky's grandfather, and it's the one that he used when he purchased his first house. On the left is my dog Uma in front of our wood stove. Becky's plant is sitting on her grandfather's table, and on the right is my dirt bike in our barn, stored for the winter. This is my pedal board for my guitars. Over the last year, I recently got into playing guitar again. And if you're a guitar nerd, you'll notice that those pedals are in the correct order. Last year, we spent the summer battling rats that got into our chicken coop. These paintings helped me pay for the exterminator. These paintings are actually from one of my favorite series, and they always remind me of being a kid. So it seems so fitting to me that the entire series belongs to one of my best friends from childhood. Love you, Keith. I recently started a series of Mount Monadnock paintings as well. I've avoided painting the mountain for most of my life because I was worried that the mountain was overdone. But after years of painting, I finally feel like I have something interesting to add to the collection of Monadnock pieces, and I'm excited to continue the series. I feel fortunate that I was able to grow up in a place like Jaffrey that allowed me a safe place to explore my creativity and eventually establish a successful career in the arts as an adult. I was lucky that I had a nurturing community and a string of good luck that combined to allow me to exist as I do. The lasting effect for me has been extreme gratitude, and that gratitude fuels my creativity. Thank you, Jaffrey. Thank you, neighbors. And thank you, friends and family. I wouldn't be here without you. So I actually can go back and bring up any of those slides. So if anybody has any questions, I can try to answer your questions as best as I can. Yeah.
If one of your favorite middle school art teachers was here tonight, what would you say to her?
I'd probably just tell her that I love her and thank you.
Well, here she is.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to get emotional again.
Your work is fabulous, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, I specifically remember that project that you gave us, which was an 8x10 piece of paper that was divided into 6 squares. And each one of those squares had a different shape on it. And it was our job to draw a picture in each square using the shape that was in that square. And I remember utilizing all of the squares to draw one picture, and Miss Alabozic hung on to it, and she showed all the other classes, and that was a big deal. Hey, Mom. Oh, you're talking about the project that I have with my friend Greg, which is it's for it's the Barber International Motorcycle Festival that we might be going to for the BMW event. I'm actually not supposed to talk about it too much because it's secret. Yes.
It's a very, very like art. I'm just curious, if you have been over to the high school to talk with potential budding artists, what's been your experience there? Or if you've not been there, would you
to be able to go over to the high school, yeah, I would absolutely love that opportunity. I love being able to talk to young people about art. That's one of my favorite things to do. Last year, I got to go to the grade school and work with the art teacher to be able to talk to the kids about art and my process. And it was such a fun experience for me because the teacher made these little dioramas that looked like a gallery, and she printed out little tiny pictures of my paintings that went inside each one of the little dioramas. So by the time I actually got to the school to be able to talk to the kids, they already believed that I was a famous artist because of me. So it was sort of an ego booster, but it was so much fun to talk to those kids. A quick story about that. One of the teachers came up to me holding this little girl's hand, and it was such a beautiful moment because she was so quiet and timid, and she said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm your biggest fan. It's such a cute, it's like, tell your mom to buy one of my paintings.
Where's Becky?
Becky's right there. Becky, stand up so everybody can see you. Hey, Dave.
How do you manage the flow of ideas?
It's hard to slow the flow of ideas down. If anything, it's I have to try to like work quick to get through them all. I do not feel like I'm in danger of running out of ideas. They come to me constantly. Even something like the rat traps. It's anything that happens in my life. I just paint. I started these paintings. These were a series of fireworks paintings because they reminded me of Jaffrey, of our hometown. These paintings are actually inspired by a series of Japanese illustrations. There was these pamphlets that they used to sell fireworks back in the day, and this was how they sold the fireworks. The pamphlets were really small, so I made the paintings much larger, basically just because I wanted them in my house. And that's what a lot of it is for me, is I make paintings that I want in my house. Yes?
When you had your exhibit at the Sharon Art Center, and those 3 pieces were sold to France, and then they asked for 3 others, you mentioned in passing some impact of social media in able to get your work out. Could you go into more detail on that?
Yeah, it was around the same time that I was in Iron and Air magazine, and that was sort of coinciding with sort of Instagram really being a popular thing. So I was putting a lot of my work on Instagram, and eventually that started to give me a global market. Iron and Air promoted me on Instagram, and the motorcycle paintings specifically is what originally gave me the reach into the global market. It's funny because Iron and Air magazine is actually, it's a motorcycle magazine, but it's different than what you might think it is. It's not just Harleys and sort of motorcycle porn, if you will. It was stories about motorcycles, and I think their tagline was motorcycles and the places that they take us. So that was a really fortunate opportunity for me. That's why I say it was a little bit of good luck, because I feel like that's sort of what it takes. One of my favorite quotes is that fortune can find you, but it has to find you working, and that's sort of what happened to me. Greg.
How many pieces of art do you think you've created?
Wow. I think probably thousands. When I was younger, I was probably making a painting every day. As I've gotten older, the paintings have taken me a lot longer because there's a lot more detail that goes into the paintings. Originally, when I was working on paintings, it was sort of one layer of paint, and then I would immediately start drawing through that one layer, and that was basically the end of it. But as I began to develop my process, I started building layer on top of layer on top of layer. So the paintings have just taken longer and longer. This painting I've probably worked on it for almost a year. I didn't just work on this painting straight though. I'm probably working on 10 paintings at any given time. Hi, Jean.
So how do you balance, your creative life with household chores and
That is actually a beautiful question. I love that question. When I was really young, it was the household chores in combination with making the artwork was something that I would do a lot of the carpentry work that needed to be done in the house, which was a way of saving us money, because when I was early on, struggling as a painter, I needed to save as much money as possible, so I was also doing, like I said, all the household chores. And currently, because my studio is in my house, it's almost like trying to get into that creative act. I kind of have to, it's like a little bit of like a mantra. I have to sort of clean up the whole house, start sweeping the floors, and all of that sort of slowly gets me into the creative process. I'll be sweeping the kitchen floor and drop the broom, and I'm like, I gotta run to the studio, it's time. It just sort of warms me up and gets me into it. Yes.
I had a question about your Monadnock series or something like that. You said you had something new to say about Monadnock, is that correct?
Yeah, and by that I meant that I feel like I have a sort of a new vision of Monadnock to be able to share. I haven't seen a lot of the paintings that are done specifically in that style. I've got a few Monadnock paintings coming up that I'm really excited about, including one with the mountain on fire, because I'm sure everybody here knows the story about the mountain being on fire. Is that a common story? The story is that they burned the top of the mountain to clear off all the wolves. So I love those sorts of stories, and I thought it'd be fun to tell those different stories of our Mount Monadnock. Try to go back to some other ones. Any other questions or? Yes.
Is there any painting that you sold that you wish you hadn't? That was kind of like selling your arm. You kind of wish you had never sold it?
I feel like I've got a couple paintings like that, but actually not necessarily. The idea that the painting belongs to somebody else and they're the caretaker of that painting feels really good to me, because the longer the painting sticks around my house, the more, like I said, I look at it and I feel like I could do better. So it makes me feel better that the painting is living with somebody else as opposed to living with me. Thought I saw another. Yes.
It sounds like all your ideas and your techniques and everything really comes from within you. But is there any one or several artists that particularly influenced you, particularly, and I'm thinking for non-American or other cultures outside the United States?
Yeah, I think that the Japanese artist Hakusai is a big-time influence for me. He's an artist that did Japanese woodblock prints. I don't know specifically what year it was, early on. And his paintings are incredibly inspiring to me. He did a series of 100 different views of Mount Fuji, and that's what inspired my new paintings of Monadnock. I was planning on maybe doing 10 views. I don't know that I could do 100, but he is one of my current biggest inspirations. And also on top of that, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. When I was young, Becky's grandmother is Japanese, and it's really funny because she always thought that my work had a Japanese influence to it, and at that time, I didn't really see it, and it wasn't necessarily an influence, but the older I get, the more I realize that, and when I started looking at Hakusai's paintings, I was so inspired by them because the way they actually layer the colors on those woodblock prints is very similar to the way that I apply paint as well. So I feel like there's a kinship between my paintings and those Japanese woodblock prints. Jean.
How large are those? What are the measurements of inadvertent paintings?
This one's probably about 3 feet by 2 feet. The big square one is probably about 4 feet by 4 feet. These little rat traps here are probably, 6 inches by 8 inches. What's that? Well, some of them are mouse traps, but the main problem was the rats. Adam.
Do you listen to music when you paint?
Oh, I listen to music all the time. Music is like one of my, I have music going on in our house 24 hours a day. A lot.
Listen to different styles of music for different paintings?
Yeah, that definitely. I've made some paintings in the past that sort of like were like a little bit politically motivated, and in that case, I'm listening to like angsty hip hop. But when I'm doing something like the paintings of Mount Monadnock, I love listening to a lot of jazz music. When I painted these paintings of dinosaurs, I really listened to a lot of like. The term is called stoner rock, but it's actually like sort of like modern versions of like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. There's one song in specific called Last Living Dinosaur, and that's where I got the idea for that painting. Yes?
You've had a lot of questions posed to you tonight. Thank you for answering them.
Thanks for the questions.
One question that we haven't asked you that you wish we had asked you.
That is a very good question. I don't know. Maybe it's. That's a really hard one to answer. I wanted to make sure that I was able to express tonight how much my community meant to me. So maybe something involving that, something about my family. I didn't have a lot of time, but I wanted to be able to touch on how creative the other members of my family are. My father is an amazing artist. My sister, who's here, is an incredible artist. I feel like it runs in the family. It might be what I touched on earlier, where I was saying like a lot of that is forged in fire. So I think that growing up the way that I grew up was very fortunate. It helped me sort of be able to get through the early years of being an artist, because there's a lot of people that will tell you that you're not going to make any money at this, and I'm lucky that I grew up without a lot of money because I was never afraid of being poor. So, yes.
Which brings me to a question about how you might share your art with others that need community. In other words, have you thought about how art is taught in our schools today, and how it should be something as a source of such pride? I mean, you come from such a background of, it seems to me like freedom through art and expression through art, and how many children could really benefit from what you have been able to accomplish in your life. What do you think about connection with education in this country and art?
Yeah, I think it is so important to have social programs in a community, to be able to like help the people in a community that don't necessarily, that aren't as well off as the rest of us, because that help pays dividends in the long run. It's very easy for people to, be upset that their tax money is going to this or to that, but the really important thing is that who you're helping are those children. And a lot of times those children are hopeless nostalgics like me, and they stay in their community and they try to bring their artwork outside of the community in order to get people to look into that community. So I think that is very important, to be able to help out young people, help out not just young people, but older people, because they have young kids as much as possible. It's very important to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind. Yes?
What type of paint medium do you use typically?
Oh yeah, I didn't touch on that. I use oil on the very early paintings that I showed you, the ones of the Sharon Art Center. Those are actually done with house paint, and I drew through the paint really quick while it was wet, and I didn't have a lot of money, and those were experiments. So it was lucky that those experiments worked out, and there was interest in it. But after I made those, I actually started using oil paint, because oil paint takes so much longer to dry, and I add different mediums into the oil paint to get it to dry a little bit quicker and to be able to hold its shape with the palette knife. And then the waxes that I add on top of those paintings, it's not encaustic wax, it's actually a furniture wax. And that furniture wax sits into every single little groove that's left by the palette knife. And that's what gives, you can see all those little dark speckles in the sky. Those are all just raised areas of the painting where the wax is collected. Yes. No. This is fun. I could talk to you guys all night.
Given how you're describing your technique, it sounds to me like it would be just such a nightmare of cracking and, different mediums not, melding together. And do you ever come across that?
No, because it's just all oil paint, but the surface layer is just like a gesso or an acrylic base, and then it's all oil painting, so I'm not actually mixing any mediums, I'm just drawing through the paint. And the wax itself is an oil-based product, so that actually, that sits on the painting, and it's actually really beautiful because it makes that painting durable. I've had paintings that I didn't like and I left in the barn, and my barn flooded and they got soaking wet, and I pulled the paintings out of the water and they're perfectly fine. All right, oh, one more.
How can we see more of your art in person? I've seen it at the National Art Tour and at the Civic Center, but do you ever have hours where people can stop by your studio?
I am always really open to anybody coming to my studio at any point. I've got a website, and on the website is my phone number. And anytime anybody wants to come look at any of my art, there's the art tour that's coming up this fall. But outside of the art tour, I love having people visit and check out the work in person. As long as they don't mind a mean, barky dog, you're allowed. Yes.
Chris, do you feel, when you're painting, do you feel pressure to perform and put a product out there? I feel like you're competing, you're trying to sell yours and other artists are trying to sell theirs. Or do you feel any pressure?
I don't really feel pressure unless I'm making a commission, and then I'm worried and I want to make sure that the painting, that the client loves the painting. But beyond that, I am incredibly competitive. I feel competitive against everybody, every artist that I see. In fact, I know a painting is really good if I look at it and I'm like, damn it. Like that.
It seems like it's a very competitive.
Yeah, I'm super competitive too. I want to make sure I'm the best painter. Ah, that's so nice of you. Yes.
Your paintings project a lot of humor and brightness. Is that by intent?
It is by intent. I'm so glad that you said that, because that's something that I think all the time. Even with like painting the motorcycles, I was talking earlier about wanting to show the artist's hand. I want to be able to do the drawing unedited. I don't want to go back and fix little mistakes. So I love like drawing an entire motorcycle and then stepping back and look at it. And sometimes I laugh about how wonky it is. And that brings me joy. But I'm constantly making paintings with a little bit of an edge that's humorous to me. Like this painting was so funny to me because it was based off of an early Catholic comic, and the dinosaurs are all wrong. So like when I was painting, I'm just laughing at the fact that like the T-Rex never had a horn on his face. I'm constantly trying to add a little bit of humor into the work. All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
I appreciate that. Here, stand out here. Oh, okay.
Well, I have to admit that Chris had me at, I rebuild bicycles. Everything else has been just a treat since then. So thank you again. This has been a really interesting, entertaining, and thoughtful evening for all of us. As is our tradition, the way we say thank you is to present you with a half gallon of New Hampshire maple syrup. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. That's awesome. This is, I go through so much maple syrup at my house, so this is amazing.
Well, we'll just have to have you come back and speak again when it's empty.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, that concludes the evening. Please join us next door for a reception, some light refreshments and discussion. And please join us next week. Joan Baker will be our speaker. She's coming out from Santa Fe. She's a writer, a memoirist, a photographer, and I think you'll find her very interesting. So please do plan on joining us, okay? With that, we're adjourned.